The wind howled through Whistler's Junction like a voice mourning all that had been lost. And on a wooden bench beneath the broken station clock, a woman sat waiting for something that might never come. There are places where silence clings like smoke, and Whistler's Junction was one of them. Not much more than a way station between forgotten trails and failed mining towns. It had once been hopeful, the kind of place folks passed through with wagons full of dreams and children who still believed in angels. But by the spring of 1887, the wind had carved out most of the stories here. What remained were splinters of buildings, crooked signposts, and the moan of the rail line that only came twice a day, if it came at all. Clara June Whitlock sat alone beneath the leaning shadow of the Whistler's Junction station house. Shoulders hunched beneath a wool shawl that had long lost its fight against the wind. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, though there was nothing to see. No light, no train, not even a rider. Only sand chasing itself in tight circles across the wooden planks of the platform. She gripped the cracked leather handle of her medical bag, like a child might clutch a talisman. Inside were remnants of the life she'd once had. A brass pocket mirror with a missing hinge, a pair of folding scissors dulled by years of use, and certificates signed by men who now turned their backs when her name was spoken aloud. The cold out here wasn't the kind that bit. It waited. It slipped into the spaces between ribs and beneath fingernails. Clara had known this kind of cold before, in the back alley of a St. Louis infirmary, kneeling in blood and snow after losing a child whose mother never got a name. But that cold had been louder. This was quiet, indifferent. A single lantern glowed inside the station window, throwing a slice of pale gold onto the platform. It flickered when the wind moaned, then righted itself again like it was too stubborn to die. Somewhere far off, hooves struck the earth in a steady rhythm. At first, Clara thought it was her mind playing tricks, a sound remembered from stories or sermons. But it grew louder, steadier, until she could feel the tremor of it, rising from the soles of her boots, up through her spine. He emerged from the veil of dust like something conjured from myth, tall in the saddle, broad across the shoulders, coat heavy with dust and travel. His horse, a black with a silver-streaked mane, moved like it had been born under the moon. Clara's breath caught, not from fear, but something colder. Hope had a sharp edge when it came without warning. The rider dismounted in one motion, tying the reins to the hitching post with a smoothness that spoke of practice, not pride. As he stepped closer, the station lantern caught his face. Dark eyes set beneath a low-brimmed hat, mouth hidden by a well-kept mustache, jaw that looked carved from stone. He stepped inside the station, and the door groaned like it hadn't moved in years. The wind followed, throwing grit against the walls. "Evenin', miss," he said, voice low and warm, touched with the rhythm of the southern trails. "Mighty cold night to be sittin' out here alone." Clara's lips parted, but her teeth betrayed her, chattering too hard to form words. She nodded, slow, uncertain. The man removed his gloves, revealing strong hands, calloused but careful. His eyes found her medical bag, lingered. "Name's Beauregard Ashford," he said, his voice quieter now, like he was speaking into something fragile. "I own a spread about 20 miles north. Been in town settlin' a few things before the storm rolls deeper." He crouched a little, enough to look her in the eye without looming. "You a doctor?" "Miss?" Nurse," she managed, forcing her jaw to behave. "Clara Whitlock, from St. Louis." Beau's brows lifted just slightly. Out here, a nurse was worth more than a banker, more than a preacher. "Well, Miss Whitlock," he said, standing again, "you're gonna freeze to death if you stay here much longer. Station ain't heated, and the night's just started." "I don't have money," Clara whispered. "Boarding house. Turned me out this mornin'. Said I'd used up my kindness." "That ain't your concern now." He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders before she could protest. It smelled of pine soap, saddle oil, and wood smoke. "Get in you warms," the first order. "We'll sort the rest later." When she tried to stand, her legs failed. Her knees buckled and the bench scraped behind her. Without hesitation, Bo caught her up in his arms like she weighed nothing. "I've got you," he said. His coat still wrapped around her, the bag tucked between them. "Let's get you across the street." The hotel stood stubborn and solid despite the wind. Its sign creaked on rusted chains, the Mercury Bell Hotel and Post. Inside, warmth met them like a mother's hand, thick with the scent of baking bread and old wood. Every head in the lobby turned when Bo carried her in. The clerk, a pale, wiry man with a ledger and spectacles, rose immediately. "Mr. Ashford, sir. What in God's name?" "Found her at the station," Bo said calmly. "Get me your best room. Blankets, hot food, coffee. And if Doc Harrell's still in town, send for him." The clerk obeyed without question. Clara, barely conscious, let her head rest against Bo's chest. The sound of his heart, slow and steady, was the last thing she remembered before sleep swallowed her whole. She awoke to warmth. A fire danced in the stone hearth. The room smelled of coffee and sage. Soft blankets cocooned her on a well-made bed. Light filtered through gauze curtains, and her bag sat neatly beside the chair. Bo stood by the window, cup in hand. His eyes moved from the glass to her as soon as she stirred. "Mornin'," he said. "Thought you might be hungry." She sat up slowly. I don't know how to repay." "Name's Bo," he said with a half-smile. "And you don't owe me a thing." He placed the tray on the table by the window. Scrambled eggs, warm biscuits, a jar of peach preserves, and coffee so black it gleamed. As she ate, Bo sat across from her. Not asking questions, only watching like a man measuring whether to speak. "I was dismissed," Clara said finally, staring at her cup. "A doctor tried to force himself on me. I defended myself. Broke his nose. The board believed him." Bo said nothing at first, then quietly, "Good." Clara blinked. "I hope it hurt," he added. "Some men need breakin' before they stop takin'." She almost smiled. The first in months. "I thought maybe out west," she said, "where folks still build things with their hands. Maybe I'd matter again." "You already do," he said. "I've got 60 men on my land. Not one of 'em's had proper medical care since last spring. I was looking for someone who could do more than wrap a bandage." Her eyes met his. "You're offering me work." "I'm offering you a place," he said, "with dignity. A cabin, supplies, food, and your own name on the door." Clara felt her throat close. "Why me?" He paused, then said almost to the fire, "Because I've been prayin' someone like you would come along. Someone who won't look away when a man's dyin'. Someone who's got strength. Someone who'd break a man's nose rather than let him take." The words hung there. She looked at him, really looked. And in the flames dancing on the walls of that old room, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long while. The possibility of beginning again. "Then you've come to the right place," Bo said, looking at her not with pity, but something gentler. Belief. "Out here, truth's got a better chance of being heard." The sun rose sharp and white over the Arizona hills, casting long shadows across the land where things either grew strong or didn't grow at all. Light broke over the jagged edges of Whistler's Ridge, throwing gold against the sandstone, and for a moment the desert shimmered, like it had something to say. Clara June Whitlock sat tall in the saddle. Bo Ashford's old coat cinched tight around her waist. The sleeves still too long, the shoulders too wide. The ride had started early, just as the town's only church bell rang 5 slow tolls through the empty morning. Ahead of her, Bo rode with an ease that came from years in the saddle. One hand resting on the horn, the other loosely holding the reins of his dark gelding. The desert around them was a sea of muted color, pale green mesquite, copper rock, and dust as fine as flour. Overhead, the sky stretched without end. Clara had never seen a sky like this, not in St. Louis, not in all her years traveling east to west, north to south. It was the kind of sky that made you feel small, and maybe that was the point. She gripped the reins of the mare Beau had brought for her, a sweet-tempered roan named Sunday, and tried not to think too hard. But her mind, as it often did when quiet settled in, wandered back to the last hospital ward she'd walked. Pale walls, the stink of bleach, whispers behind closed doors. Her hands had trembled the day they handed her walking papers, not because she was afraid, but because no one had looked her in the eye when they did it. Beau had said nothing for most of the ride, letting the desert speak for them. Occasionally, he'd point to a turn in the trail, or a fence post nearly buried in sand. Once, they passed a dried-up creek bed, where a lone jackrabbit scattered at their approach. "Halfway there," he finally said, tipping his hat toward a distant cluster of dark roofs nestled between cottonwood trees. "That's Hollow Crow's." From this distance, it looked like a mirage. Too much order in a land that rarely obeyed. But as they crested the ridge and came closer, Clara could see the truth. The ranch wasn't grand, not like the mansions she'd glimpsed along the Mississippi, but it was solid. Square beams, stone chimneys, fences well mended, men moving with purpose across the yard. She had expected dust and chaos, shouting and whiskey. What she found was a place humming with quiet industry. Beau dismounted near the corral, where several hands were working a young bronco. He turned to Clara and held out a hand. She hesitated, not from distrust, but surprise, then let him help her down. Her legs were stiff from the ride, but she steadied herself quickly. A group of cowboys approached, one with a hand wrapped in a bloody kerchief. "Boys," Beau called out, his voice carrying but calm. "This here's Miss Clara Whitlock. She's a nurse, trained proper. She'll be staying on." The one with the bandaged hand, lean, weathered, a good 20 years her senior, stepped forward and tipped his hat. "Name's Tom Cutter. I run the crew here. Any friend of Beau's is someone we'll treat proper." Another voice piped up, younger, nervous. "I cut myself on some barbed wire yesterday. It's been achin'." Clara moved toward the boy without hesitation, scanning his face, pale with worry, not pain. He couldn't have been more than 16. "Let me take a look," she said. "Where's the cut?" As the boy led her toward the bunkhouse porch, Beau fell into step beside her. "Your cabin's the one with smoke comin' from the chimney," he said. "Martha, Cookie's wife, stocked it with the basics. There's a wood stove, linens, and whatever else we figured you'd need." Clara nodded, glancing at the tidy little structure tucked to the side of the main house. It was simple, but even from here, she could see it had care in every board. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. By mid-afternoon, she'd treated the boy's cut, cleaned up 2 blisters from branding accidents, and helped an older man relieve pressure from a sprained wrist. The work steadied her. It was something she understood, something she could do even when everything else felt uncertain. Beau found her in the clinic an hour before supper, standing in the doorway of a room she hadn't noticed before. He pushed the door open gently. "I figured if you were staying, you'd need a place to work that wasn't a bunkhouse bench." Inside, the space was small but immaculate. Polished wood counters, a proper examination table, shelves stocked with bandages, bottles, instruments. The light from the high window hit the cabinets like sunlight in a church. Clara stepped inside, slowly, touching the smooth counter, the clean tools. "This must have cost you a fortune," she murmured. "A good nurse is worth that and more," Beau replied. "I ordered most of it months ago. Figured I'd find someone. Someday." Clara turned toward him, her throat tightening. There were so many things she could say, but only one felt right. "I'll take care of this place," she said. "I'll make it count." That evening, after stew and cornbread with the rest of the crew, who had already begun calling her "ma'am" with respect in their tone, Clara retired to her cabin. She lit the oil lamp and placed her bag by the foot of the bed. The fire crackled in the stove. A clean quilt, embroidered by hand, lay folded at the foot. She sat on the porch in the rocking chair Martha had left and stared at the stars, the silence brushing against her like an old friend. A knock sounded, gentle, polite. She opened the door to find Beau holding 2 tin mugs. Steam curled from them. "Hot chocolate," he said. "Martha says it's her finest work." Clara accepted the cup, the warmth welcome against her palms. "Thank you." He hesitated. "I don't want to compromise your reputation," he said. "I think my reputation can survive a cup of chocolate with my employer," she said with a faint smile. He stepped inside and sat in the chair opposite hers by the fire. "How are you settling in?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Better than I expected. The clinic, it's more than I hoped for." They sat in comfortable quiet. The firelight danced between them. "I should be honest about something," he said after a while. Clara tilted her head. "When I found you at the station, it wasn't entirely by chance. The hotel clerk mentioned a nurse had been inquiring. I went to the station hoping to find you." Clara absorbed the words slowly. "You knew who I was." "I didn't know your name, or what you'd been through. But I knew I needed someone who could do what you do, someone who might understand." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "Thank you for telling me." Beau exhaled. "There's more. I'm drawn to you, Clara, from the moment I saw you on that bench. But I want you to know, your place here is yours, regardless of how you feel." The fire cracked softly. Clara stared into it, her thoughts circling. "I appreciate that," she said. "And for the record, the feeling's not one-sided." His eyes met hers. For a moment, neither spoke. He stood. "Tomorrow, Martha will show you the garden, and Cookie wants you to see the pantry before he lets you near his stew pot." Clara smiled faintly. "Good night, Miss Whitlock." "Good night, Mr. Ashford." He turned, opened the door. Outside, the wind curled low through the prairie grass, stirring dust and silence alike. That night, as Clara lay in a real bed under a quilt that smelled of cedar, a knock came at her cabin door, and there stood Beau Ashford, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate and something unspoken in his eyes. They said the wind never stopped in the high country. It just changed what it whispered, depending on what you'd done. The first true spring morning at Hollow Crow's ranch broke over a sky painted in streaks of dusty rose and pale blue. Below that gentle dawn, Clara Whitlock moved among the corrals like she had always belonged there. Though no one would have guessed her presence had once been the subject of skepticism. She had traded St. Louis starch and scandal for dust and purpose, and her hands, red from scrubbing and sun, told the story better than any newspaper ever could. Inside the small barn, behind the stables, a mare groaned softly. Clara leaned over the animal's flank, guiding the newborn foal from the world between worlds into the straw. The birth had been complicated, tangled in a way that would have broken a lesser woman's nerves. But Clara had stayed calm, drawing on instinct and knowledge in equal measure. The moment the foal hit the hay, lungs filling with the thin highland air, Clara sat back and wiped her brow with her sleeve. Outside, the ranch was waking up, the low rumble of voices, the scrape of boots on dirt, the occasional clang of a pail being dropped in water. She rose, muscles aching in that useful way hard work brought. When she stepped out into the sun, she blinked, letting the light hit her full in the face. Danny was already waiting, lanky frame leaning against the post near the chicken coop. His hat was too big for his head, and his freckles multiplied by the day. "Mornin', Miss Whitlock," he called. "Heard cookies makin' molasses flapjacks. Reckon you earned a double stack." She smiled and waved him toward the clinic. "Only if you promise not to try catching snakes again with your bare hands." He grinned. "No promises." Over the next hour, Clara cleaned and dressed a branding burn, stitched up a boot heel cut, and mixed a cough tonic from dried horehound and licorice root that Martha had tucked away in a corner cabinet. The men came to her without prompting now, shoulders squared, hats held to chests. Respect, slow and sure, had begun to settle over her like dust on saddle leather. Later that afternoon, she found Beau near the back fence, hammer in hand, repairing a post that had snapped in the last windstorm. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, and sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. "Got a moment?" he asked, setting the hammer down and wiping his brow. "I do." They walked along the fence line, just past the east field where the cottonwoods stood like sentries. The silence between them had changed, not empty now, but full of things not yet said. Beau spoke first. "I was married once," he said quietly, looking not at her, but at the land. "Her name was Edeline. We met in Texas when I was just back from the war." Clara listened, breath caught in stillness. "She died 3 years ago. Fever took her before the doctor even got to the front gate. We never had children. Tried. Didn't work out." "I'm sorry," Clara said. She was kind, beautiful in the quiet way, but she was delicate, happy to tend flowers and read stories to the neighbors' children. I loved her, but—" His voice drifted off, lost in the breeze. "But I'm not her," Clara said. Beau turned to face her. "No, you're not. You're strong, fierce in a way that makes a man want to do better, not just be comforted." Clara looked at the ground. "I don't know how to be anyone's comfort." "I don't want comfort," Beau said. "I want truth. I want something real." Before either of them could say more, the sound of thundering hooves cut across the field. Dust rose in clouds, and Tom Cutter galloped toward them, his face pale and mouth set tight. "Boss," he shouted, reining in hard. "It's Danny. He's been hurt bad." Clara's heart twisted before she moved. The world narrowed into a single thread of motion, feet pounding across packed dirt, Beau's stride matching hers, the bunkhouse ahead like a doorway to something too awful to name. Inside, Danny lay limp across 2 bedrolls, blood already seeping through his shirt. His chest rose and fell in uneven jerks like a fish out of water. Tom hovered nearby, hands shaking. Lightning hit close. Spooked the horses. Danny got between 'em, Clara knelt beside the boy, checking his pulse, listening to the rasp in his chest. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, maybe worse. She stood, calm in her panic. "Clear a table, we're losing time." "What about the doctor?" Tom asked. Beau was already turning toward the door. "I'll ride." "There isn't time," Clara said, her voice like iron. "If I don't open him up now, he won't last an hour." Tom hesitated. "Do you trust me?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "I do." The bunkhouse became a war tent. Lanterns were brought in, boiling water from the kitchen, knives from the forge. Clara rolled up her sleeves, tied back her hair, and opened her bag with the same reverence a priest gives the Bible. For 3 hours she worked, fingers slick with blood, mind honed sharp. She spoke gently to Danny, even as he drifted in and out of consciousness. Tom passed tools, wiped sweat from her brow. One of the ranch hands threw up outside. No one left the porch. Beau returned with the town doctor just as Clara was stitching the last suture. She didn't look up. "Wash your hands," she told the doctor. "If you're going to check my work, do it clean." The man, gray-bearded and skeptical, obeyed. After 10 minutes of silent inspection, he stepped back, eyes wide. "This," he murmured. "This is as fine as anything I've seen in Denver. You've saved him." Clara's knees nearly gave. She sat back hard on a stool and took a breath that felt like it had been waiting a year to be let out. The room held stillness, not silence, breathing, the rustle of fabric, a man crying quietly by the door, but stillness, reverence. Bo crossed to her and knelt. "I've never seen anything like what you just did." "I've never done anything like that before," Clara admitted. "Not alone." "You weren't alone." They looked at Danny, chest rising steadier now. Then Clara saw the telegram on the table, unopened, her name typed neatly on the envelope. She picked it up, read it. Her hands went cold. The name at the bottom made her throat close. Dr. Milton Ransom. She looked at Bo. "He's coming." Bo's jaw tightened. "Let him." Clara didn't smile. She felt the weight of everything settle across her shoulders. Bo didn't blink. "Then we'll be ready for him." But outside, the wind rose suddenly, slamming the cabin shutters closed like a warning shot. They didn't burn witches in the Arizona territory, but they did have other ways of showing a woman she wasn't welcome. The church bell in Ash Hollow rang 5 times that morning, though it wasn't Sunday, and no sermon was due. It wasn't even the real church bell, just an old mule shoe hung from a timber crossbeam at the courthouse porch. Still, its toll was enough to gather the curious, the righteous, and the bitter, all of them drawn like flies to honey at the promise of public reckoning. Clara June Whitlock stood alone on the wood-planked steps of Dead Horse County Courthouse. Her dark green dress, plain but clean, fluttered lightly in the dry wind. The same wind-tossed grit across her boots, caught the hem of her shawl, and pushed her hair loose from the braid she had worn so carefully. Beside her, Bo Ashford stood tall, hat pressed to his chest like he was mourning a man already buried. "Don't let him talk over you," he whispered, low enough that only she could hear. "You saved that boy's life. Don't you forget that." She didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the doorway where the marshal now appeared, papers in hand, badge gleaming against his coat. "Miss Clara Whitlock," he read aloud. "You stand accused of practicing medicine without legal authority under the statutes of the Arizona Territory. You are ordered to appear before Judge Simon Randall, present your credentials, and answer to claims brought by one Dr. Milton Ransom of St. Louis." The crowd murmured, not loud, but enough for Clara to feel the heat crawling up her neck. Inside, the courthouse was dim and dry, with beams overhead like ribs of some long-dead thing. Dust motes spun through the light from the windows, and the air smelled faintly of horsehair and old paper. The judge's bench was high and crooked, and his chair creaked when he sat. Judge Randall was a lean man, gray as the gravel road outside, and had the look of someone who'd once been a schoolmaster before being called westward to enforce laws that didn't always match the land. His eyes were sharp, but not unkind. Milton Ransom stood to the right of the room, a smug shadow in a city suit. His mustache was waxed, his boots polished, and his sneer practiced. He had brought with him a black leather satchel, the kind men carried when they wanted you to think they were important. He didn't look at Clara. Not directly. Predators never looked until they lunged. Judge Randall cleared his throat. "We'll proceed without delay. Miss Whitlock, state your case." Clara stepped forward. Her voice did not tremble. "I am a trained nurse, certified by St. Mary's Hospital of St. Louis. I practiced there for 6 years. I was dismissed after an incident involving Dr. Ransom." The judge raised an eyebrow. "What sort of incident?" Clara kept her eyes on the grain of the wood below the bench. "Dr. Ransom attempted to take liberties. I defended myself. Broke his nose." A low chuckle ran through the room, quickly silenced by the gavel. "Do you have proof of your credentials?" the judge asked. Bo stepped forward, producing the folded certificates Clara had kept hidden at the bottom of her medical bag. The judge studied them carefully. Behind him, Ransom shifted, cleared his throat. "Those papers," Ransom said smoothly, "are signed by men who later revoked their support." Miss Whitlock was dismissed for cause. "What cause, doctor?" the judge asked. "Moral turpitude," Ransom replied, smiling without humor. "She's been traveling town to town ever since, avoiding formal inquiry and endangering lives by practicing without oversight." Before Clara could speak, a voice rang out from the gallery. "That ain't true." All heads turned. Danny stood in the aisle, one arm still bandaged, his face pale but fierce. "She saved my life. Doc from town said no one else in the county could have done what she did." The doctor from Cheyenne stepped forward. "It's true, Your Honor. I examined her work personally. It was precise, life-saving, better than many of my own students." More voices rose. Tom Cutter, then Cookie, then Martha, each testifying in their own way, about burns treated, fever broken, babies delivered. "She don't just mend bones," Martha said. "She gives these men peace of mind." Judge Randall listened, unmoving. Ransom's voice was sharp. "These are cowhands and cooks, not medical professionals." "And yet," said the judge, setting the certificates down, "they speak with more clarity and honor than you have thus far." The room fell silent. "You accused this woman," the judge continued, "but I see no evidence of harm. Only proof of skill, community trust, and service to the public." He raised his gavel. "Miss Whitlock's credentials are hereby recognized under the emergency provisions of this territory. She is granted full permission to continue medical practice within its borders. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel fell. Cheers erupted, not wild, not raucous, but full of something Clara hadn't heard in years: respect. Ransom tried to step forward, but the marshal blocked his path. "Best move along," the man said, "before someone decides to hang a second trial out back." Bo turned to Clara, eyes shining. "You did it," he whispered. "No," she said, her voice thick. "We did." Outside, the wind had shifted. It was softer now, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. The crowd had thinned, but the faces that remained were warm. Cookie held his hat over his heart. Martha wept quietly into her apron. Bo took Clara's hand, gently but firmly. "What now?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes steady as the horizon. "Now, I ask you to be my wife." The day they married, the air smelled of wild sage and new rain, and even the sky seemed to pause in quiet reverence. The night before the wedding, Clara stood alone on the porch of her little cabin at Hollow Crows, watching the prairie stretch quiet and endless under the light of a swollen moon. From across the yard, laughter drifted from the bunkhouse, the low sound of a harmonica threading through the air like smoke. Cookie had been preparing since dawn. Barrels of root beer and crates of salted beef lined the barn wall. Someone had painted old horseshoes white and hung them with ribbon from the chapel doors. Clara closed her eyes and listened to the wind whispering through the cottonwoods. There had been a time, not so long ago, when she'd imagined dying, nameless, in a poorhouse bed, dismissed, forgotten, lost. Now here she stood, with the smell of bread baking in the air, a wedding dress folded on her bed, and a heart full of something she had long believed was lost forever. Bo Ashford had proposed with no grand speech, just a simple question in the fading light outside the courthouse, the same way he'd offered her a place at the ranch. Steady, honest, no promises of perfect days, just the chance to build something together. Real and lasting. Morning came clear and golden, the storm of the past week washed away by rain and judgment both. The ranch had never looked more alive. Chickens scattered beneath bunting, strung between fence posts. Children from neighboring ranches ran barefoot past barrels filled with lemon water. Cowboys polished their boots for the first time in a year. Inside the main house, Martha and 3 neighbor women helped Clara dress. The gown, ivory silk with tiny pearl buttons, had come from San Francisco, a gift Beau had ordered months ago, quietly, long before she'd agreed to stay. Martha, cheeks flushed with joy, brushed out Clara's long hair before weaving prairie flowers into a crown. Bluebonnets. A sprig of lavender. One wild daisy. "You look like a woman who's come through fire," Martha said, tying the last ribbon, and somehow made it shine. The makeshift chapel stood between the main house and the stables, with a wide porch draped in muslin. White chairs lined the aisle. Tom Cutter, stiff in a too-small vest, waited with an arm crooked and awkwardly offered. "I ain't your father," he muttered, "but I'll do the job." "You're more than enough," Clara said, slipping her arm through his. As they stepped into view, the crowd rose. The wind caught her veil and lifted it gently, like the land itself was giving her a blessing. She saw Beau at the end of the aisle, in his finest black suit, nerves on his face for the first time since she'd known him. But when their eyes met, everything else vanished. The voices, the stares, the weight of years. There was only the 2 of them, walking toward something they hadn't dared dream would be real. The preacher was a circuit man, tall and sunburned, with a voice that carried even over the lowing of distant cattle. His words were simple, about love and partnership, about storms weathered and hands held steady. Clara listened, heart still, her fingers woven through Beau's, callus against callus. "Do you, Beauregard Ashford, take Clara June Whitlock to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Beau said, voice steady and full. "And do you, Clara June Whitlock, take Beauregard Ashford?" "I do," she said without hesitation. The preacher nodded once, smiling like a man who'd seen enough dust to know what mattered. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. May the Lord bless the home you build." The kiss was soft and sure, and when they pulled apart, the ranch erupted into cheers, not the wild, rowdy kind, but the joyful, communal sort, like a family welcoming someone home. Feast followed. Cookie served roasted beef, garden squash, and a 3-tiered cake that had somehow made the trip from Denver without crumbling. Children danced in circles, hands sticky with jam. The cowboys told tall tales until the sun went down, and lanterns were lit across the yard. Danny stood, one arm still stiff from his recovery, and raised a glass of lemonade. "To Mrs. Ashford," he said, "the woman who saved my life and made our boss smile like he ain't smiled in years." Clara felt the tears gather before she could stop them. She squeezed Beau's hand, and he, in turn, kissed the back of hers. As the crowd thinned and the music softened, they found themselves alone on the porch of the main house. Now, their house. The moon had risen again, casting pale silver over the ranch. "Well, Mrs. Ashford," Beau said, pulling her close, "how does it feel to be a married woman?" "It feels like coming home," Clara whispered, "like everything that came before was just preparing me for this." They danced slowly. No music but the wind and the distant hum of voices from the bunkhouse. He moved with quiet grace, his hand resting at the small of her back, her head on his chest. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his coat pocket. Inside was a locket, delicate gold, warm from his touch. Clara opened it with trembling fingers. On one side, a photograph of the 2 of them, taken that afternoon. On the other, engraved words, simple and sure, forever and always. "B.A., her voice broke as she whispered, "Jack, it's beautiful." He fastened it around her neck. "Now you'll always have me close to your heart." She placed her hand over the locket. "I already do." Later, as they walked back toward the cabin in the dark, lanterns glowing behind them like stars fallen to earth, Beau stopped near the barn. He took her hands in his again. "I set aside land," he said, "east of the old spring, for a hospital." Clara blinked. "We'll call it Whitlock Springs. You'll run it, train others. Make this place more than just a ranch, a sanctuary. She nodded slowly, emotion building like thunder, and then, without another word, he kissed her again, there beneath the cottonwoods, where the sky stretched wide and endless and full of promise. And as the wind curled through the cottonwoods behind them, Clara whispered into his ear, "Forever and always, even after the West forgets our names." The first year of marriage brought both joys and challenges to Jack and Libby Thornton. And Libby June Ashford, now of Hollow Crow's Ranch, would come to understand that even the most cherished life could test the soul that built it. In the summer heat of 1888, the Arizona Territory turned gold and cruel. The prairie grasses dried out early that year, crisping under the relentless sun. Dust collected on windowsills no matter how often Martha swept. Horses leaned into the shade, breath shallow and steaming, while even the chickens seemed to scratch with less enthusiasm. Clara stood in the shade of the clinic's porch, her hand resting lightly on her belly, not for reason of pain or sickness, but in quiet contemplation. Life stirred inside her, not yet enough to quicken with motion, but enough to change the shape of her world. The pregnancy, still early, was something she had dared not speak of yet, not until she could find the words that weren't wrapped in fear. Her eyes drifted out to the east pasture where Bo stood, overseeing a new pen being built. The men worked slow but steady, their laughter floating like soft echoes across the heat waves. He was bareheaded despite the sun, wiping his brow now and then with the back of his hand. Every now and again, he'd look back toward the house, just to make sure she was still there. They had settled into married life without ceremony. No titles changed hands, no grand reordering of roles, just the steady merging of lives, work, breath. Clara continued as the ranch's nurse, doctor in everything but name, and Bo continued to be the man who listened before he spoke and stepped forward only when needed. But the outside world had not forgotten them. In the spring of 1889, just as the creek began to thaw and the cottonwoods bloomed with green buds, a telegram arrived from Silver Creek, a mining town some 30 miles north. Cholera. 4 cases confirmed. A doctor already lost to the fever. Could she come? The decision was made without fanfare. Bo offered to ride with her, but she shook her head. "I'll be faster alone." He looked as if he wanted to argue, but didn't. Instead, he packed her supplies, filled her canteen, and kissed her like a prayer before watching her ride off through the dust. She returned 5 days later, hollow-eyed, 2 pounds lighter, and with the sour smell of carbolic still clinging to her skirts. She had saved most of them, not all. Clara didn't speak of the girl who died on her second night there, or the miner who begged for death by the third. But Bo knew. He held her quietly that night, in the porch rocker, until the moon passed overhead and sleep finally came. In the months that followed, Clara's reputation spread like wildfire on the wind. Men came from Cheyenne and Denver to see the infirmary at Whitlock Springs. Her name appeared in a Boston medical journal, though the article merely referred to her as a woman of significant skill, though informal title. Still, she persisted. Her nursing school opened in the back wing of the clinic. 3 girls from neighboring ranches came, then 5, then 9. The youngest was 15, the oldest 26. Clara taught them everything she knew: how to set a bone with willow bark tea for strength, how to sew skin tight with the edge of a quail feather, how to speak softly and command attention in the same breath. Bo, for his part, thrived in his own way. The ranch grew. His cattle line crossed 100,000 acres before the year was out, and buyers came from as far as San Francisco. He was elected to the Territorial Assembly by the autumn of that year, though he never campaigned. Folks just trusted him, said a man who loved a woman like Clara had to be worth following. Still, not everything was easy. Clara's past, though buried, had not been forgotten. In the middle of October, a stranger arrived by the Cheyenne rail, a newspaperman from Chicago, his boots too polished, his notebook too eager. He stayed 3 days, asking questions, poking into the courthouse archives. It was Bo who asked him to leave. "We've paid our debts," he said simply. "This ain't a place for digging up bones just to sell them." The man left, but not before mailing his notes east. The article never ran, or if it did, no one mentioned it. The winter of 1890 came early. Clara gave birth to twin boys on the first frost morning, their cries shattering the silence like music. They named them Thomas and Jackson, after Bo's grandfather and her father. The boys grew fast and wild, crawling before most children learned to sit. And Clara found herself learning new lessons, not about anatomy or fever, but about lullabies and rocking chairs, about how to soothe colic and when to laugh instead of cry. 2 years later, a daughter came, dark-haired and solemn-eyed. They named her Rebecca, with Clara's full blessing. "Let her carry the best of what was," she told Bo, "and build something better with it." The ranch became more than a place. It was a legacy. The school expanded. A post office opened beneath the infirmary. A church bell, real this time, was hung beside the garden where Clara grew lavender for medicine and peace. One evening, after supper, Bo took Clara's hand and led her beyond the spring. There, on land she had once ridden past without thinking, stood a framed building, not yet complete, but strong and wide. "It's yours," he said, "the permanent hospital. We'll call it the Ashford Whitlock Infirmary." Clara blinked back tears. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "No," Bo said. "You are. This is just what you made possible." As they stood there, with the scent of fresh timber in the air and the sound of cattle settling for the night, Clara felt something deep and anchoring settle in her bones. She had come west with nothing but a bag, a name, and a spine forged in fire. Now she stood surrounded by land that bloomed because she stayed, people who lived because she dared, and a man who never once tried to soften her edges. She had once believed she was forgotten. Now, history would have to remember her. And yet, even amid so much joy, there came one final echo from the past. Not a man, not a scandal, but something quieter and deeper. The arrival of an envelope, weather-stained and postmarked from St. Louis. It bore her maiden name. Inside, a single folded page, written in a hand she hadn't seen since the courtroom. "There are still those who speak your name with reverence. I wanted you to know that." It was unsigned. She folded the letter and placed it in the locket Bo had given her. She would tell her daughter one day. Not yet. But someday. The wind carried laughter from the bunkhouse porch, and the cattle lowed peacefully in the pastures. And in that quiet, Clara June Ashford lifted her eyes to the stars and whispered, "We are still here." She had once believed the world would forget her, but it hadn't. Not really, and not ever. Out here, where the land remembers better than most men do, the wind still sings the names of those who came before, and if you listen closely, you might hear hers among them, not loud, not proud, but steady as a rider's heartbeat on the long trail home. And maybe that's the kind of legacy that matters most, not the kind etched in marble or penned in books, but the kind that lives in the rhythm of hoofbeats at dusk, in the pages of letters never mailed, and in the shape of a scar healed with care. For even now, the cottonwoods still whisper through their leaves the stories of a nurse with cracked hands and a straight spine, and a man who knew enough to kneel to a woman's strength rather than try to stand above it. It's in the wildflowers blooming along Whitlock Springs, in the sound of an old harmonica carried faintly through the dusk, in the worn rocking chair on a porch that no longer creaks under silence, but remembers lullabies, and in the rustle of a child's hair brushed gently by fingers that once stitched flesh, but now smooth curls with tenderness. And sometimes, in the scent of old leather and pine soap, you might feel the ghost of a man who never raised his voice, but once faced down a lawman with nothing but truth in his stance, and a woman behind him who needed no protection, only space to fight her own battles. Justice didn't come roaring through their lives. It came in pieces, in a courthouse where a dusty judge finally listened, in a half-built hospital framed with sun-bleached timber, in a town that learned to speak a woman's name without shame or whisper. Regret never left entirely. No. It hung in the edges like evening fog over the hills, but peace moved in beside it, brought by children's laughter, by girls who signed their names on nursing certificates with ink-stained fingers, by men who tipped their hats in gratitude instead of doubt, and by the quiet acknowledgement that though it had taken too long, the West had made room for a woman's truth. And isn't that something? That in a place known for dust and gunfire, it was kindness that endured. It was forgiveness that built foundations stronger than any stone. And it was memory, not glory, that gave her her name back. We forget too easy in this world. Forget what dignity looks like in a woman's eyes, or what redemption sounds like when spoken in a child's voice, or what it means when a man plants his wealth not in land, but in trust. But stories like these help us remember, like how a cracked leather bag can carry more salvation than a Bible, how one wild daisy in a woman's braid can say more than pearls ever could, how a locket held close can silence the jeering voices of the past, and how sometimes the best kind of love is the quiet kind that waits beside you while you find your strength. They say the West was won by guns and grit, but I say it was healed by hands that trembled and still reached forward anyway, by women who stood alone in train stations and still said yes to the next morning, and by men who bent low, not from shame, but reverence. If you've ever loved someone enough to wait through silence, if you've ever believed in the goodness of a stranger, or known the weight of being right when no one believed you, then maybe, just maybe, you understand her. Clara June Ashford, who wasn't asking to be remembered, only to be allowed to keep living. And if that ain't a kind of holy, I don't know what is. So if her story touched something quiet in you, some old truth too soft for shouting, but too strong to forget, go on and leave a sign below. Even just a word, or a candle emoji, or your grandmother's name. Something to show the world we still remember people like her, and men like him, and towns that learned to listen before it was too late. And if your heart's still listening, well then, we'd be mighty honored to have you subscribe to this humble channel, where old stories still get told the slow way, by oil lamp glow and with a voice like cracked leather. Because the world may be fast, but some things, like honor, redemption, and the sound of a woman standing up in a quiet courtroom, deserve to be heard just a little longer. So come back next time, friend, and until then, remember this: the truth doesn't need the whole world to believe it, just one soul brave enough to carry it forward.